Go ahead, Thea.
Namaste and greetings. I, Diya Goswami, researcher at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, Prabhav एवं नीति अनुसंधान संस्था, Nai Delhi, extend my warmest welcome to you all to IMPRI #Web Policy Talk. Today we have gathered for the panel discussion on the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change 6th Assessment Report, Implications for Urbanization, as part of the series Local Governance with Shri Tikender Singh Panwar. This event is organized by IMPRI Center for Habitat, Urban and Regional Studies, IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, New Delhi. Now I'll take this moment to introduce our gathering to you. As the moderator of today's session, we have with us Shri Tikender Singh Panwar. He is the former Deputy Mayor of Shimla and a visiting senior fellow at IMPRI, New Delhi. We welcome you, sir. Moving to our esteemed panelists for today, we have with us Professor Anil K. Gupta, Professor of Policy Planning and Strategies at Disaster Risk Reduction and Sustainability. Sir is the head of the division, Coordinator of International Cooperation, Advisory Services, and the Program Director at the Center for Excellence on Climate Resilience, National Institute of Disaster Management, Ministry of Home Affairs, Government of India. We are honored to have you, sir. Welcome to the session. We are delighted to have with us Dr. D. Raghunandan from the Delhi Science Forum and All India People's Science Network. We welcome you, sir.
Thank you.
We also have with us Dr. Simi Mehta, CEO and Editorial Director at IMPRI, as the co-moderator of the session. We welcome you, ma'am. Now I invite our moderator, Shri Tikender Singh Panwar, to initiate the discussion with his opening remarks and proceed with the event. We look forward to learning from our esteemed panelists. Thank you.
Thank you, Diya, and thanks for that lovely introduction of our guests, panelists. And right at the inception, let me welcome Professor Gupta, Professor Raghunandan, and it's indeed a pleasure for us. This web series that we've been running since long, called #Local Governance, to have both our guests here. And as you know, today's topic is quite interesting, though quite difficult to understand. That's what Arjun pointed out in a very informal chat, that everyone doesn't understand what the IPCC is, and what is this report, because this report is a huge voluminous work that goes into some 3,700 pages. That includes the citations of the works of different scientists. So how do, but we all feel the impact of the climate change, and we do not really have to be experts into how this is happening, but yeah, I think the impact is quite visible, quite vivid. Now the point is, the sixth report, and this is the working group 2 that has come out with this study. It was released in the last week of February, and why is it that #Local Governance is interested into having a discussion on this report? I think there are a few reasons for that. And before I jump and ask the Raghunandan to explain about those reasons, I think for the first time, probably there's an extensive work done by the scientists on the cities. And in fact, the chapter on cities is running into almost 183 to 200 pages. That speaks about the extreme vulnerability of the cities, and about the mitigation and adaptation challenges that cities face across the globe, including the coastal cities, in fact, which are the most vulnerable, and not to miss the cities in the mountains. And quite specifically, they pointed out the Hindu Kush range, which is more vulnerable. The second aspect is, I think which is very interesting, probably Dr. Raghunandan will deal with that, is, that this report also deals about some systemic changes. I mean, for the first time, probably I have come across the term, and where the report quite vividly points out that it's a systemic problem, and it's quite unsustainable. The kind of system we are living in is quite unsustainable. So if this is the unsustainable form of development that it talks about, then what should be the sustainable form of development? I think it suggests some of the ways. I think that is also an area which we need to dwell upon. And the third part is that it speaks about the interplay of many forces in between. It's not just the technocentric solutions that we've been talking about. It speaks about inequity, it speaks about sustainability, it speaks about many other things. So I think with those opening remarks, it would be prudent on my part, and then Dr. Simi is there. I think later, maybe when he introduces Professor Gupta, she can add if he wants to add later. It is better that Dr. D. Raghunandan takes the discussion ahead. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Tikender, and good evening to all our viewers. I think I have my screen shared because I have a small presentation I'd like to share with our viewers today. And here we are. Yeah, so that's it. So I'll quickly go through this and won't take too much time. Whatever I've written will be on the screen, so I may not spend much time detailing out each of the points because you would have seen it. I'll highlight the major features. I think Tikender's introduction has given me a very good entry point to this report. So let me start by saying that when I read this report, it actually reads very differently from earlier Working Group 2 reports of the IPCC. And this is the 6th in the series. It reads differently because I think if you read the earlier reports, they are in the format of, here are the impacts. This is what happens. Agriculture, crop production will decrease so much, sea level, it will rise so much. And if these impacts are there, this kind of solution could be followed with some discussion on implications. This report reads very differently because it does not give you this problem solution and problem solution kind of approach. It is a multi-dimensional framework. It adopts an interdisciplinary approach to the issue and talks about risks and solutions. Risks across the physical science of what's happening with the climate and with attempts to reduce the impacts through mitigation, and then talks about ecosystem as well as societal impacts. That is, you'll have an impact both on the ecosystem and on society, on human communities. And therefore, solutions which cut across adaptation or resilience, which means the ability to be able to deal with these problems and to build resistance to them, along with developmental pathways and transformative mechanisms. So problems are looked at not as unidimensional problems, and solutions are not looked at as unidimensional solutions. So this is a complex approach. It also means that a reader has to have either great expertise or an open-minded and patient approach to go through the various dimensions of the problem and their solutions. So, in overall terms, what the report tells us is that the magnitude of the impacts and its, one second, there's something in my way. Yeah. The magnitude of the impacts and the risks which have been observed show that a very high scale of response is required in order to build climate resilience. So we have heard through the various reports, as well as between the 5th and the 6th assessment report, we have had 3 special reports from the IPCC. One on the global target of 1.5 degrees, one on impacts on the Earth system, on the terrestrial system, and one on the impacts on the permafrost and the cold system of our country, and one on sea level rise along with this. So those impacts have been well documented earlier. But what, therefore, this report summarizes is that the risks are more severe and are appearing sooner than was expected in the 5th assessment report. And also, and importantly, AR6 says that these impacts will, what it calls, cascade through the ecosystem. That means if I have an impact on the city, it will have an impact on the energy supply system. It will have an impact on health. It will have an impact on human welfare. So the effects of the impact cascade through both the ecosystem and the human system on this. So these cascading effects are very important to understand. And secondly, that solutions must be compatible with sustainable development, with social justice, as well as with climate justice. So therefore, we are looking at solutions which are not, as I said, unidimensional. Sea level is rising, how do I control sea level rise? Or how do I stop the sea from hitting me in my face? But it must also address maximum co-benefits across sectors. So if I'm tackling sea level change, I also want to tackle impact on the lives of fishermen. I want to address saltwater inundation into freshwater systems and the impact that will have on human health, etc. So I want benefits across sectors, which will build in social justice and climate justice, addressing different sections of the population and address their relative vulnerabilities to these problems. Importantly, the assessment report also says that opportunities for adaptation may decline if we allow temperature rise to cross 1.5 degree Celsius. After that, chances of adaptation may get low, and we may have no option except to say the only way to control the situation now is to achieve the mitigation targets of keeping within 1.5. If it goes beyond 1.5, essentially it goes out of your control to be able to stop the impacts. So that's a very important finding in the 6th assessment report. So let me talk about some of the major findings and ground the findings not so much in the discussions in the report itself, but in the context of India and what we know in terms of the impacts on India. And I think that will give us a better appreciation of this. And I will take 3 examples from India to address these issues. Firstly, some major findings or perspectives in the report, which I've put inside quotes, are firstly that current dominant models of energy intensive and market-led urbanization, they build very high carbon dependency and high vulnerability into cities. Our cities, especially in India, are very few of them are planned cities. Chandigarh was a planned city that was a long time ago by Le Corbusier. Delhi has pretensions to be a planned city, it has a master plan, but most of it, once you've got a plan on paper, the master plan on paper, then changes are made in a very ad hoc sort of manner. Most other cities don't have master plans of this nature, nor are they followed in practice. Our cities are energy intensive, and they are essentially cities built around market-driven concept of real estate. You find a piece of land, you build something on it and make a building. You don't think about various other impacts on climate, on carbon, etc. So there's a very high carbon lock-in in our system, and they are designed in such a way that you require a lot of energy to run them. And because of this also, and because of differential socio-economic status, each of our major cities in Delhi, in India, have close to half their population are poor, are migrant, live in slum colonies, and therefore have very high vulnerability to climate change. So as that's the report also says, and it keeps repeating this again, that the most rapid growth in urban vulnerability and exposure has been in unplanned and informal settlements, slums, jhuggi jhopadis, etc., especially in low and middle income nations like us, as well as in small and medium urban centers. It also says that unplanned rapid urbanization, including peri-urban development, that means urban sprawl. All big cities in India are like that. You have Mumbai, and then you keep extending the suburbs outside. In Chennai, you have Chennai, and then it extends all the way up to Kanjivaram and 60 to 70 kilometers radius. You have Delhi expanding into the NCR, where you have urban sprawl, unplanned settlements coming up here and there. And that's another major driver of risk, because these peri-urban settlements are expanding into land which has very different land use originally. It could be forest land, it could be coastal land, it could be agricultural land, or it could be hill lands very prone to landslides, etc. And unfortunately, most interventions that we think about are hard engineering solutions. And Tikender said there was a warning to this, and we'll see some examples as we go. So let me come quickly to the three major examples that I'd like to touch on. The first is on extreme rainfall events. We have all seen in India, now it has become almost annual, regular, that there is heavy urban flooding. We've seen it in Mumbai, we've seen it in Chennai, Hyderabad, in Delhi, Gurgaon, not to mention the hills, which I'll come to later. They have seen severe urban flooding, and major reasons for this are that our drainage is highly under capacity. They were designed and built probably 80, 90 years ago, not been updated since. They are not able to take heavy rainfall in Delhi, for example, of up to 100 centimeters. But now we are getting these extreme rainfall events, which are 300 millimeters plus in a day. Same in Mumbai. In Thane last year, we saw 500 millimeters in one day, which is normally 1 month's quota. So the drainage is not able to take it. Water comes out, is on the roads. The drains that take this water out, the river Miti in Mumbai, the rivers Adyar or Kuam in Chennai, these are all blocked by construction, malba, garbage, etc. So there's nowhere for the water to go except to come back into the city. All the lakes in Bangalore, number of lakes have died down, plus again, construction has blocked all the lakes. In the hills, we've seen the notorious floods of 2013. And when Kedarnath was destroyed, the whole hill town virtually disappeared. Several hill towns and pockets in that, for example, Srinagar, were washed away because they had built right up to the river. Nobody had allowed this, nobody had sanctioned it, nobody permitted it. but you had settlements right on the river bank. So as soon as the river flooded, those settlements are also wiped out. And in these areas in the hills, and these are specifically quoted in the IPCC report, you have unregulated road construction, unplanned settlements in the hills, in this very fragile ecosystem of the Himalayas, extreme rainfall, and very bad planning to go in. So risks are higher and they cut across sectors. They affect housing and habitat. They affect roads. They affect infrastructure. They affect sewage. They affect public health and cause huge loss and damage, which we saw even in earlier this year in the floods which washed away hydroelectric projects in the Tapovan area with all these attendant problems. Two factors should be noted. Change in older cities like Delhi, Mumbai, etc. will be costly, of course, but the longer we delay it, the even more costly it is going to get. And in newer settlements also, the longer we delay, the higher the cost. And of course, if we anticipate what we are going to do, we can reduce costs. But if we do achieve resilience, we can improve the quality of life, we can reduce future costs, we can improve health, we can reduce inequality and vulnerability between different sections of the population. I'll quickly talk about sea level rise. The maps on the right you will see here shows very vulnerable coastal cities in Mumbai. You can see this map here. How much of Mumbai is under threat of sea level rise? You can see marked in red. Surat on top, Puri in Odisha, Kochi and other cities in Kerala, Chennai, which we see regularly. There has been a recent mapping being done showing very high resolution images. This is the Sundarbans area that you can see right on top, which almost the entire deltaic region being wiped out by sea level rise there. And here is some modeling projections you can see. On the left, you can see the gateway of India half submerged if temperature rise reaches 2 degrees Celsius. We are 1 point something today, 1.2. And the picture on the right shows the gateway of India if at the end of this century, if temperature rise crosses 4 degrees Celsius, the entire gateway is virtually submerged. The entire seafront over here is gone, which shows you the extent to which the threat exists. And this is what is happening here. You can imagine a 2-meter rise inside of Bombay will virtually wipe out the whole of South Bombay, which will come under water. The third example I'll give you is of what is called the urban heat island effect. That is where temperatures outside the city, temperatures inside the city could be 1.5 to 2 degrees Celsius higher than the average for the country or outside the city. In Bangalore, for example, in the new airport, it is found that temperature inside the city, at the heart of the city, is 1.9 degrees Celsius higher than at the new airport. So urban expansion, the amount of heat we generate through air conditioners, you can see in the top pictures, congestion, concretization of the system, the number of vehicles on the road, all contribute to a heat island, trapping of the heat inside the system, along with reduced green spaces, reduced water bodies, of course, increased AC use, etc., etc. An integrated approach of which we are talking with housing with insulation, green housing, you can call it, energy efficiency of ACs, etc. More urban commons which are accessible to the entire population, not just for the rich and others. These will promote resilience. They will reduce greenhouse gas emissions, address your local heat problems as well as address climate change. They will reduce the urban heat island and heat stress and promote equitable well-being. Air pollution, finally, last example, we all know about it, familiar with it. Major sources are vehicles, road dust, industries, and cooking. These are known, out of which predominantly vehicles and road dust are the main contributors in most cities. Most cities in India are actually doing nothing about it so far. In fact, out of all the state capitals that we have, not more than 9 or 10 even have public transport. If you don't have public transport, you're going to have a huge number of personal vehicles on the road. In Delhi today, with a population of 20 million, we have 13 million personal vehicles on the road. That's almost one per family. What is Delhi doing, which is perhaps the most ahead in terms of trying to tackle air pollution? There are some piecemeal measures regarding cars. Delhi, of course, is fortunate in having the metro, which has taken about a few 100,000 cars off the road, at least till now. Delhi is trying to introduce e-buses. We already have CNG buses, less polluting than petrol, but still not zero pollution. Electric will go a long way. Very few regulations on construction, which is the major source of pollution. We are getting a regional rapid transport system connecting the suburbs to Delhi. And we've got this hopeless thing called a smog gun, which has been introduced by the Delhi government under pressure from the Supreme Court. I don't know where the Supreme Court got the expertise to recommend a smog gun and force the Delhi government virtually to implement that, as well as the IIT to implement this. It will do nothing at all. In fact, recent readings in Delhi have shown that the effects of this smog gun are within a meter of where the smog gun is rotated. After that, it starts dropping off very rapidly. So it's not going to do anything. But if an integrated approach is adopted, then a major effort on public transport will address equity a lot. Poorer people can be able to travel more. If it's linked with urban planning, it will reduce the distance that people need to travel. It will address air pollution and health, as well as climate change. I think these are the directions in which thinking is required and we need to address. And lastly, as I will say, India has now focused almost exclusively on mitigation. And most of that is to satisfy the developed countries. And we have a sort of tacit understanding, we won't put too much pressure on you if you don't put too much pressure on us to reduce emissions. But island states, least developed countries, they see climate change as having an existential threat on them. That is, we'll cease to exist. And have therefore demanded deep cuts by developed countries. AR6 report, this one shows that India is among the worst affected countries. There's one map with color coding where India and a few other countries are shown in red as the most affected countries in the world. And therefore, it is equally in India's interest, like it is in that of the island nations or the LDCs, that it must increasingly push for more deep emission reduction actions by the developed countries. India is already contributing to that effort. And India badly needs a national action plan on adaptation. We have not even scratched the surface yet. There's no plan, there's no thinking, there's nothing that we have done. Even though impacts on agriculture, we've only talked about urban areas, but impacts are visible across economy and society. But this will need joint formulation by all stakeholders so that everybody's interests are looked after, and a very effective executive body to oversee implementations. We are very good in India at making plans and laws and hopeless at implementing them on the ground. 2 points should be noted. many, if not most, adaptation actions fall within the jurisdiction of the states. Land is a state subject, urban bodies are come under states, agriculture is a state subject. So it could be convenient for the union government to say, this is not my problem, let the states look after it, let the states spend money. It's not going to happen. States don't have the money and they don't have the capabilities either. And I'm sure Professor Gupta can touch on that. He would have seen this in disaster resilience as well. Therefore, it needs national effort and separate and as well as substantial financial commitments to be able to tackle these myriad problems. I'll stop there. Thank you very much and invite you to visit our website. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Well, that was really wonderful, Raghunandan. And I didn't imagine that you'll cover cities so well, because I thought you'll be covering the larger picture. But I'm so glad that you brought focus back to the cities. Simi, would you like to take it from here?
Yes, thank you so much, sir. I would like to invite Professor Anil Gupta for his remarks. Sir, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Simi. We were listening to Professor Raghunandan, and he has brought a very good summary and also tried to exploit with the other layers of challenges that are of very serious nature because of the impact of climate change. A few points from my side. The very first thing that for me, the significant focus on cities in the sixth assessment report is not a great surprise. Why I say so? Because now and very soon, the world means cities. We are urbanizing so fast that I was in fact today in the field visit and observing so many other aspects of landscape here in the southern part of the country. And what is my thought that in future, if the pace and the trend of growth continues like this, the landscape ecology or the landscape geography that we talk about, or landscape planning that we talk about, would be certainly limited to or synonym to city landscape. Because we are not going to have natural rivers, we are not going to have natural hills. This is a great fear, or you can consider is my conviction. And why this conviction is becoming stronger day by day? Because most of the talks, most of the emphasis of our concerns on resilience is concentrating around large cities and metropolitan cities. There is really very less coverage on actually what is happening in smaller cities, because those towns and cities, we can say tier 3, tier 4, these kind of municipalities, there is no focus. No one talks about this, but they are in fact the greater contributor to urban challenges, not only in India, but the entire South Asia, or even many other countries of Asia Pacific also. So that is very important thing. And when this report has brought a specific focus, I think to some extent we all are happy that this focus has been brought by IPCC. But again, as Tikender ji was also referring, that IPCC reports of thousands of pages. How do we really be able to transform the insights that are generated through these reports in bringing the ground change? That is the major issue. In fact, in the month of August 2021, we organized an international discourse on localizing climate resilience agenda. And the focus was basically that whatever we are discussing at high-end levels, international level, national level, how do we really see that to what extent we can bring the ground change? So that is important issue. And when we talk about bringing the ground change, looking into these lessons, which are the inferences that are drawn by IPCC working groups and the group of authors, I think there are not one or two layer of changes. There are multiple layer of changes that we will need to look at. Climate change, most of the time, our reference is about the extreme events. Yes, extreme events are certainly increasing in terms of frequency, in terms of aberrations in their time. For example, this year winter also we had a lot of winter rains. So non-seasonal occurrences. Then we have started seeing the more cyclones on the west coast. These kind of challenges are there. But beside this, another emphasis that this report has brought, very important one, in looking to ecosystems, and also the societal dimensions. And when I look at these both ecosystem aspects and societal dimension, I see that the two-way relationship. When the society and the people of the society, they are under pressure, in turn, for their existence, for their livelihood and other things, they start exerting more pressure on ecosystems. And on the other hand, when ecosystems are depleting, then they contribute to additional layers of vulnerability to society. And that we have started witnessing the increasing the migration from the climatically affected disaster-prone areas to cities, and that we have witnessed in COVID period. And in the COVID period, actually, we realized that how what is the huge number of migrant population from our disaster-affected areas now taking shelter in our cities. Currently, in India, we are also working for developing the Vision 2047. That is 100 years of India's independence, and as we have this Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav. So on one hand, we have good cause, good thought process that we are developing, and we are developing in a good way. We are trying to look at that, how do we address the basic needs of the people. And in fact, that is a big dichotomy, because on one hand, a large number of people in our country still do not have drinking water, access to drinking water, and many other things, even the toilet facility. And for this, we will need, along with the infrastructure, we will need the good amount of quality water also. But on the other hand, if we look at the Central Groundwater Board data, we find that the critical zone is expanding. So on one hand, we want more and more water. On the other hand, we do not have water. And even if the water is there, the quality is not fit for use. So we have to basically operate in a situation of dichotomy. And now hardly 7 years or more than a little more than 7 years are left. And we plan to achieve our the sustainable development goals also, Sendai framework targets also, as well as the whatever we discuss and then reiterated in Glasgow. So I think that the challenge is very big. But how do we really bring a smaller ground change? That is the issue. So what I would and there are certain insights also, that instead of looking at only translating or copying the approaches, I think we will have to move ahead a little more in terms of innovations and contextualization of the approaches available for addressing climate risk. For example, the green buildings. Many of the green buildings you witness, even we find that now so many green buildings, so-called green buildings as per the standards, in the part of southern India also. How can we have the almost similar models or similar designs of green buildings, which we have learned and we have seen in maybe in Berlin or in London or in other colder cities or the colder countries, and then we start implementing in Hyderabad, Vijayawada, Chennai, and so that in fact poses additional energy requirement for cooling, because more than half of the year this is a very dry and very hot area. So basically these kind of standards and models also need contextualization. And currently the government is also emphasizing that we start looking at the local solutions in terms of knowledge, also blending the traditional wisdom and also locally available materials also. In fact, in the reconstruction project of Uttarakhand disaster 2013, there were good pilots of using locally available materials, and that actually helped reduce the carbon footprint that was otherwise required because of the transportation of material from the outside. So I think these are the things a few examples I'm just referring. Second thing, one of the very big issue, most of our cities, and in fact Professor Raghunandan also referred to air pollution also. Most of our cities are struggling with the waste management issue. Even NCR, Delhi also we find, and then there are conflict between the municipal bodies and the civil administration or the general administration over money, over resources, over wages, salaries, and so many things. I think it is already too late to work out the zero waste approach, and I think this should be one of the prime concern of our revisiting city administration and city planning. Because if we continue the conventional waste management strategy, we will be just allowing the real resources and then spending money unnecessary in the waste management and waste disposal. So basically we have to not only evolve, rather we have to very fast revolve the entire strategy. And that is very important in terms of water also. Urban water, one of the biggest challenge. Many of the cities are now people are considering as ghost cities just because of water. When water is not there, the kind of challenge that we can see. Chennai 2015 it was flood, 2016 and 17 it was drought. So now you see that urban water management, I think it's a very big issue, but it is not that we do not have a good example. The city of Marshall in France and many other cities in the world, and see the kind of irrigation practices in some of the countries, that even a single drop is not given over and above the threshold, that the amount of water that is required for a particular crop. Now I am referring to agricultural water requirement in the context of cities also, because now cities have a new type of land use, that is urban agriculture. And if you look at other cities of the world also, for example, London, more than 70% of the fruits and other things and the vegetables supplied to the city of London come from the urban agriculture itself. So this is very fast expanding in our country also. So I think the new land uses and these issues also need to be looked into with significance. Peri-urban system also Dr. Raghunandan referred to, but I think Tikender ji is a kind of a always whistleblower and always takes lead in this discussion. But Tikender ji, you would agree that past 15 years we are talking that we should have some kind of mechanism that to address the peri-urban issues. But all these still remain in the reports of the pilot projects, or some or other way academic discussions are the policy discourses. So I think a new model of urban planning has to be there, but certainly not bound in a very tight framed manual. That is also very important, because the model for Gurgaon cannot work for as a replicable model for Noida. So I think, and recently I have been working, and currently also I am working, and very shortly I'll be able to share with you a new approach that I am trying to work out, a framework concept, planning framework concept, looking at the integrated mechanisms, because COVID has taught us that something that we have been ignoring, the health issues, and particularly health issues in cities. And then peri-urban issues are more even serious. Then coming towards the final points of my deliberation today. Now, when we look at in the background of climate change implications, the modifications or improvements in city planning, I think two important things we cannot forget, and those are in fact very, very serious and very, very emergent issue. And that comes from this. Before 2 years, I think before 20, if we saw a electric vehicle flying on the road, we used to stand and see as if something new. But now on Delhi, in the roads of Delhi, even you see all kind of electric vehicles flying very frequently. So within 2 years, we have started seeing a great transformation. COVID has also brought transformation in our working culture, in our social life also. We are more electronically driven, concentrated in our computer, mobiles and all. So, and all the management of various amenities and services in cities also, even the supply of all shopping, e-shopping, e-merchants, all kind of things. So even cities are evolving into new e-cities. So the future cities are not going to be the normal cities. Within few years, the cities are going to be purely e-cities. And second thing, like in technology, two disruptive change. One is robotics that we are going to see, and we have already started seeing robotics. They're very popular applications of robotics. So how do we see the new backgrounds and new contexts of city resilience when we have the new technologies approaching each and every sphere of city governance, city management? But besides this, the social reformation, that is also very important, because we are also witnessing very fast the new type of urban society. Now people are more concentrated in their gadgets rather than talking to each other or talking to neighbor. So how in those times we are going to look at the complex scenarios of risk and also addressing that. So these are few points from my side that I think we should come up with some kind of pilot exercises to revisit different the planning approaches for different tier of cities, because again a 10,000 population or 1 lakh population, then different layers of cities will have to see different aspects coming into context. And this is I think an emergent issue that we should not delay it, and we should start coming up with some kind of pilots. And I'm sure that we will have to work together, and we'll have to rope in with some of the municipalities to test these kind of pilots for improving the planning process. So thank you very much for inviting for my some of the thoughts in the background of this latest report. And I think now all the reports are bringing almost same kind of things, only the intensity and seriousness of the extremes that is always emphasized, and that is a reality. So even if we do not wait for the new report to come, we have to be really very, very serious. And the last point, that the climate change does not precipitate disaster. Actually, climate change coupled with even more the non-climatic actors in development. So basically, how do we manage those non-climatic actors along with to address this climate risk is equally important. So thank you very much for inviting me for this talk. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Gupta, for your very enriching intervention. So Tikender sir, would you like to take from here?
Well, Dr. Simi, if you want to raise a few questions, or should I? And then, because I just thought there aren't any questions in the QA box.
Yeah.
And if
So,
there are a few in the on the Facebook link, so probably someone has to help us out.
sure.
Somebody.
So,
and should I, or
I can make a few points,
okay,
if you allow.
Yeah.
I mean, these are also general observations drawn from Dr. Raghu's and Professor Gupta's remarks. So, the recent report, as it is, as Professor Gupta was also mentioning, it is one of the bleakest warning as of now, as yet, of the devastating harm that can be caused by unchecked global heating. However, what is at stake is that of a livable and a sustainable future for all, which means everything. And as the UN Secretary General has mentioned, delay is death. So it is definitely a wake-up call. One thing that I found in this kind of a report is that earlier scientific studies had demonstrated that the immediate climate change implications may not be as harsh for the global north, primarily because of their location, and which might favor them in terms of agricultural productivity, etc. However, what this report clearly points out is that even this whole geographical region would not be spared. And as it is, we are continuously witnessing repeated frequent incidents of increasing deaths and also physical and mental illnesses due to increasing extremes in weather like storms, wildfires, etc. And apart from this, definitely the low-lying areas and tropical regions, they're already suffering. And as far as India's urban spaces are concerned, they might risk the opportunity of being called the engines of growth. Perhaps this process might just be reversed. So from rising temperatures to erratic rainfalls, groundwater security, availability of groundwater, rise in coastal flooding, population concentration in some areas, which might be accentuated because of desperate attempts of the people to save their lives, because it would be each one to oneself. And also food and nutrition security. And then one can imagine the whole process of implications on public health, implications on the health of the vulnerable sections of the population, etc. So all this would actually eventually lead to higher expectations from the governments to do more, to intervene, to urgently intervene. So hence, what I see in this report is that it is a wake-up call for the governments, for the policymakers, if they want to save the social order. I mean, if they do not want to see a breakdown of the social order right in front of their eyes. And I would like to respectfully disagree with what Dr. Raghu said on the government's lack of finances and also lack of scientific capacities. I think if properly channelized, they can definitely mitigate this lack, if there is any. But according to me, there is a clear lack of intent. The governmental intent is missing, and that is why we have reached to this position as we are now. So these were my understanding, and I would just end with two questions, one for Professor Gupta and also one for Professor Raghu. Dr. Raghu, I would like to know, what are the SDG implications, Sustainable Development Goal implications, amid this code red for humanity? Because the challenges of different locations, different regions, mountainous regions, coastal regions, and of course the wider geography of India as a whole, these are the implications would be different. So what lessons could be drawn out of it? And to Professor Gupta, you just mentioned in clear passing
towards the end about climate change and disaster, I believe that IPCC report evidences an impending disaster. So my question is, because you are a disaster DRR expert, should the discourse now shift from climate change adaptation and mitigation to the wider narrative of approaching the phenomenon under the disaster management understanding? What are your thoughts on this? So thank you so much. And I would like to hand it over to Tikender, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Simi. And it was really interesting. And of course, Professor Raghu will definitely respond to one of your disagreements.
Yeah, sure. I'll do both.
But I also have a question, Dr. Raghu. So you just wait for a second.
Sure.
So that, in fact, two questions, one to Dr. Raghu and another one to Professor Gupta. Why? Because you focused on adaptation strategies. I mean, you said no, mitigation shouldn't be the way forward. Whereas some of the scientists, I mean, who are quite progressive in India, are also saying that, look, we also contribute a lot. I mean, maybe per capita we are too low, but you know, our contribution is also huge. So it's high time that we should invest some 1.5% of the GDP on clean energy. You know, one of the way forwards. I'm sure you've heard about that argument. So how do you take it? I mean, why is it that not very relevant now or very imminent as of now? So that's the first thing. The second thing, Dr. Raghu, I think this is an observation that comes from a mountain man. I mean, you know, because I've seen this transformation taking place and some kind of nexus that we do not talk about. Now, I'll just cite one example, okay? That example comes from the 1980s when we nationalized our forests. So before that, in my state, that's Himachal Pradesh, and for that matter, I think even Uttarakhand, we used to get timber, I mean, this was called timber distribution rights. So every year, a household used to get 2 trees for meeting their, you know, house making, I mean, constructing houses and all. But after the nationalization of forests, everything was just cut by a slash. And just to remind you that this forest policy came under the aegis of the World Bank, which said, oh, don't cut forests and all. Now, in the same hills, you'll find timber coming from somewhere else, whereas our scientists, our mountain scientists are pointing out, hey, it's, I mean, there's a science of the mountain called, of the forest called silviculture. We should chop down some of the trees. And in fact, it is more climate resilient. Instead of getting concrete, instead of getting RCC structures and, you know, having heat island effects. So how do you respond to such a situation? I mean, it's just an example that I share with you. Lots of timber, lots of teak, Burmese teak, you know, and Chinese teak is entering. We do not allow our own teak. I mean, you know, we could have easily managed that. That's you. To Professor Gupta, I think the least that we can do, I mean, if we could just really move forward, because, you know, I was one of the first in the country to prepare a city disaster atlas. And that's why I was called in Vigyan Bhawan, and we explained, I mean, how pitiful the condition of the town governments is. If, forget about, you know, if we are even able to prepare the DRR plans of these cities, there is no comprehensive plan, there is no measurement of the vulnerability, hardly any HVRA. So even if that could be done, you know, and then that integration could further, I mean, we could just build layers. I think that would be phenomenal. But that has to be integrated to the whole process of town planning, town building, unlike what we are witnessing in the Delhi Development Authority plan 2041, the Delhi Master Plan. I mean, it's like a rail track which is going parallel. So I think that would be like really phenomenal work if we could just work on that. That's all. 2 questions. And I think there are 2 questions also in the box, which probably someone will lead. But I would suggest first you respond, Dr. Raghu, to the questions raised by Simi and me, and then probably later.
I just like Simi to repeat her second question. The first one I got on financial capacity, etc. What was her second question to me?
So about the implications on the timely attainment of sustainable development goals.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Fine. Okay. So very briefly on your first question about S&T capability, etc., and you felt that I had said we seem to have a deficit in capability, but you felt it was not the capability which was the problem, it was the intent which is the problem. Let me clarify first what I said. My point was about the relative capability of state governments vis-a-vis the central government with regard to climate assessment, response actions, etc. Let me give you a small example, even of the union government on this. If you take union government and its multiple agencies dealing with climate change, I think you could count on two hands the number of climate experts who are inside government. Maybe today I can say up to 100. You'll have more expertise in institutions like Dr. Gupta's, in a few academic institutions, and in think tanks. I remember once we had a visit from the head of the climate change section in the government of China. And we asked him, how many people do you have in the government, not in academia, etc., who are working full time on climate change? You'd be surprised at the number of people he mentioned was 5,000. So I think you would understand my feeling if I say we are under capacity. And if this is the case in the union government, I think you could understand what it is like with state governments also, who are extremely short in terms of human resources, expertise, especially in specialist departments. So that was my point there. And I still feel I'm right, that capacity is a major constraint. And we saw that manifesting itself when state governments were asked to prepare state action plans on climate change, and the amount of difficulties they had in being able to prepare those SAPCCs things. So I think the issue of capacity is to be addressed, and there's no harm in addressing the capacity, knowing that one has shortfall in that area. As far as SDGs are concerned, this entire 6th assessment report constantly talks about the need to evaluate every adaptation action that we take vis-a-vis the SDGs. That unless we do that, we are not able to bring in the aspect of social justice or address vulnerability. So therefore, we need to address that. Do we? That's the question. We have the Sustainable Development Goals on the one hand. We are constantly evaluating in government how much have we achieved social development goals, etc. But what this report is saying is, while we address adaptation issues, climate impact issues, we should simultaneously have the social development goals also in mind, so that these programs are dovetailed. And I think that's the important point being made, and I appreciate that point. I think we need to do this because, as you know, in India, government works in silos. Maybe that is true of all governments. But in India, we specialize in working in silos. So I work in my department, you work in your department. And if there is an interdepartmental meeting called once in 6 months, then maybe you and I will have a conversation. Otherwise, we don't know. So it is good if interdisciplinary thinking and interprogrammatic thinking is built into climate response and adaptation programs. For example, food security, nutrition, health, hunger. Do we look at these aspects when we look at climate change? Do we look at these aspects when you think of sea level rise? Do we look at this when we think of urban flooding? I doubt it. And therefore, the need to integrate this is, I think, important. It's been stressed repeatedly in this report, and I think we need to do that. The two questions Tikender asked, I absolutely agree with him about mitigation. I certainly think we should be doing more. I'm one of those people who have always felt that India is doing in mitigation today the offer which we first made in Copenhagen. Till then, it was a big no-no in India to talk about India contributing to mitigation. Oh, how can we do it? It's a developed country problem. They should contribute. We have got nothing to do with it. Common but differentiated responsibility. There's a Lakshman Rekha between these two. India should not be done. It would be interesting for you to know, by the way, that I think I published the first article in India to argue before Copenhagen that India should take on mitigation responsibilities. And I started presenting this in seminars in Delhi. And I honestly was expecting people will throw stones at me. Ki kya kar raha hai, anti-national, unpatriotic, this, that, and the other. I was surprised to find that I got a good reception. And people said, yeah, you have a point that India is not part of the problem, but there are good reasons why we should be part of the solution. And we can be. See, India is on the one hand talking of becoming a $5 trillion economy. We have fourth largest scientific manpower. We want a seat in the Security Council. We are the 9th largest industrial power in the world. At the same time, India cannot say, no, but we are a least developed country. We are like Burkina Faso. So like they are not doing anything, we also should not be doing anything on mitigation. Clearly, we should be doing on mitigation. And I think we have scope. That's why my argument was India should push the US and the European Union more. What will happen? They'll put pressure on you to do more. So what? I think we have enough elasticity in our NDC program. If now we are saying we will decrease by 33 to 35%, we can extend this to 40%. Chalo, I'll extend mine from 33 to 40%, provided you intensify your cut from 60% to 80%. I think that will make a big difference to mitigation standards in the world. So I agree with that. My problem, Tikender, was that while we are doing all this on mitigation, and we should be doing, we are doing nothing on adaptation. And that is to me a big worry, because today the island of Maldives feels they will be drowned. Yeah, there are islands in the South Pacific which are already disappearing, in Tuvalu and Nauru, etc. India is pretending that kuch nahi hoga, adaptation chal raha hai. They are reading it like they are reading a novel. We have got on the mainland more than 2,000 kilometers of coastline. Cities are already losing, we are losing coastal areas to sea level erosion. In agriculture, you know, in your state, how the farmers are suffering because apples are not growing where they were growing 20 years ago. The apples have gone 1,500 feet above. They are not growing there. We have seen this since 15 years. How many other such changes are there in the climate scenario vis-a-vis agriculture? We have seen this. We have seen our flooding in urban areas, but we don't know. We are pretending as if we are doing nothing. I'll give you a very brief example to illustrate this. The Maharashtra government last year after the floods announced an outlay of 450 crore to address the problem of urban flooding, and claimed, and they were right, that we are the first state government to do so. You know, but can you imagine what is 450 crore? 10 kilometers of sewage line in Delhi costs me 450 crore. So what am I going to do with 450 crore to address the problem of urban flooding in a city the size of Mumbai? You know, so, and if Mumbai is the only city which is doing this, you can imagine where we stand with regard to adaptation. So that is the point I was making. While we are addressing mitigation, fair enough, well done. We can possibly do more, but it's high time we addressed adaptation also. The National Mission on Sustainable Agriculture has gone into deep freezer. Other adaptation activities are just being, except for the disaster management activities, which is not seen from the point of view of climate, but from the point of view of cyclone aa raha hai and protect our people, in which we have done well because of disaster management preparedness, especially in Andhra and Odisha, where loss of life in the last few cyclones have been much less than they used to be earlier. We can learn from that to do adaptation programs. Odisha government, I've learned, has started building mud banks along the coast to protect the coasts from sea level rise and from erosion. How long that mud banks are going to last, we don't know, but clearly we need more protective measures. That was one point. Last point of yours on timber. I agree with you. Scientific management of timber should allow felling of trees. In fact, the forest department even today does felling of trees, and they are selling felled trees in the market. But they have permission only to do that from the Supreme Court. Supreme Court has otherwise said no clear felling. So what they are doing is lopping and chopping and things like that. The problem today, Tikender, is while I agree with you theoretically, Sweden is doing it, Germany is doing it, they are making money, they are allowing things to grow. Two big differences are in Germany, in Sweden, in the UK today, there is a process of rewilding taking place. The wild and forest areas in those countries are desolate. Nobody goes anywhere near them because they have a rural population, rural and forest combined population of between 3 to 8%. We have 50% rural population. We are fond of talking of urbanization, but 50% urbanization means 50% people are still in rural areas. That's one problem. So there is still pressure on forest, but even more. If today Supreme Court relaxes its lobby that we had, the forest department will not be able to exercise control. So I think that if till such time as we get good control over this, proper implementation of regulations, do more social forestry to enable timber, then I think the natural forests we can leave alone for the time being. Theoretically, you may be right, but the way in India systems work, I would not trust our forest department and the contractor lobby not to develop nexus again and to start deforestation. Already we have seen dense forest areas in our country have been declining. And what we are classifying as we are growing in forest areas is actually outside the forest, which is there. So I personally would not touch the forest areas for now. Thank you.
I think Professor Gupta has to respond to the questions because Raghu, I think maybe we'll take this discussion later on. Because why I was interested is also the kind of housing that we require. You know, housing in mountains require a different typology.
Absolutely,
absolutely. To have timber, you know, so maybe,
absolutely.
Yeah, but I agree with you. There's no disagreement on. I mean,
absolutely, absolutely.
So I think Professor Gupta also has to respond, and then I think Arjun or Dr. Singh, someone has to take the questions. I mean, because I can find.
I can do that once
Gupta, I think
Gupta sir has responded.
I mean, if briefly you could respond to the questions because we are already running. I mean, we thought we'll be finish. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I'll be very brief. And as from the discourse also, it is coming that in the area of adaptation, now the focus is less. And some focus in the area of disaster management is there. See, this is a reality in the society, and particularly when the part of the society is still struggling with basic issues also, because in my deliberation also I referred the dichotomy. We have very good examples also, but at places we still have challenges and issues. There is a line by the Tulsi Das, Bhaya bin hoye na priti. So basically, this is also very important to some kind of pressure. So this threat. So people are concerned about the challenges of disasters because that relates with damages and losses. And even the corporate world has also started realizing that they need to come forward, they need to invest in disaster risk management. So the point, Mr. Tikender, that you made about the HRVA of cities. I totally agree that as at present, there are very few examples where cities have came forward and developed disaster management plan. But recently, we undertook a very detailed study jointly with some of our IT partners. 4 cities we have taken: Srinagar in Kashmir, Guwahati, then Vishakhapatnam, and one more city, that is Jaipur. 4 cities. And we have basically worked with closely with the city administration in coming up with a HRVA scoreboard approach. Because again, if we come up with this very kind of scientific approach, then its replication would not be possible. So hopefully our report, and then we are also coming up with a step-by-step guidance to cities for risk assessment and developing resilience. So a very simpler tool, and developing a pocket book also. I think it would be wonderful. We will be sharing with you before we publish it, and the insights from you would be also value addition. So I'll talk to my team to share with you. So maybe by the month of April, we'll be able to share. So that initiative we have already taken. That's very important. That's very important. We'll take it. See, what I see that when the emphasis is on mitigation, probably we will also have to work on the models that how mitigation actions can have adaptation benefits and vice versa. I think this is not correct that we still continue having a clear line. Are we trying to draw a clear line between mitigation, adaptation, and DRR? There are a lot of energy, lot of the boundaries are very much blurred. Yeah. So even if we invest for zero waste strategy for our cities, it has a lot of adaptation benefits also. Agroforestry is one example that has been discussed here also by you. Agroforestry has both adaptation as well as mitigation benefits. So I think the fraternity which is working on adaptation, the fraternity which is working on mitigation, I think there is also need to convergence within the fraternity. We should not be too tight compartmentalized that we say no, our emphasis in mitigation. Ultimately we have to have all the 3 kind of interventions. For short term, there we adapt to the extremes, and then we have the risk management strategies or the crisis management approach, then mitigation. So we develop some kind of resilience, and then move towards sustainability. That how do we reverse to the possible extent the impact of climate change? So I think that is very important, and that is the reason I refer to that we need a integrated approach basically for planning also. Now in cities, we cannot leave aside that the health is separate issue, because some of this, I think, Professor, you mentioned about the departments are compartmentalized. I think that is a reality, but who will bring them together on the board? I think exactly. It is a collective responsibility, because otherwise they will continue like this. So we will have to work out a model that they do not have an excuse, and they have to come on a common platform. So when a common or integrated planning framework is there, they will have to certainly come on that. Disaster management planning has to some extent provided this platform, because that is an integrated planning approach, and there many of the departments have to come on board. So some success is there, but it is a long way we have to go. And I think very important points have been raised, and I totally agree to that. Thank you.
Maybe would you take it there? Yeah, Professor Raghunandan, please go ahead.
No, I was saying that there's one question in the chat box. There are actually 3 questions rolled into one addressed to me.
Yeah.
So if you want,
can I read it
please,
now?
Please.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'll answer that. Appreciate the point made by Dr. Gupta. In fact, once again, I'd request participants, if they go through my slides, and if you remember what I presented, each of them talks about these multi-dimensional responses, which simultaneously address mitigation, adaptation, and this range of problems that you mentioned, the health, the developmental goals, the developmental pathways, etc., addressing SDGs and so on and so forth. That's the only way we can address these questions, and not by looking at them. And in fact, the 3 questions which have been asked to me will also illustrate this, so I'll answer that. The questions basically is about the cooling action plan and about air conditioning. And what the questioner is saying is, the action plan on cooling essentially is talking about how to finance the cooling, how to make the cooling more efficient, but is not really addressing the issue of whether we need that much cooling or not, how to reduce the need for cooling. In fact, that's precisely the example I gave. We should start by talking about the air conditioning load in each of our homes. Unfortunately, there is no regulation which tells you how much load you should have on your house for air conditioning. Or there is no building code which tells you the design of the house, the materials of your house, so that you can reduce the air conditioning load. I'll give you a very brief example. In Germany, when they started introducing their rules on reducing mitigation, they had to address the problem of home heating, because unlike us, they're a cool, cold country. So every house there has a oil burning furnace below, where they burn the thing and generate steam which circulates around the house and reduces the heat. They did two things. They said you should reduce the thermostat on that so that the heating extent is reduced. Okay, you may feel a little still cold, but wear a sweater. You don't have to heat your house so much that you can sit there wearing a t-shirt. You can do it so that you're dressed for winter, but you still feel cozy. Like that in India, in Japan, they've got a rule. In China, they have a rule. If you're in offices, the thermostat should be set at 25 degrees Celsius. You climb into any Rajdhani or Shatabdi train, and you will see temperature is set at 19 Celsius in India, because लोगों को in India मजा आता है कि गर्मी में इतना एसी ठंडा करो कि कंबल को ओढ़ना पड़ जाए, तब एसी का मजा आता है. We enjoy it, then we feel, yeah, अब है ना फायदा मेरे एसी का. After all, I struggled so long to earn enough money to have an AC in my house. I should feel कि मेरे पास AC है तो रात को रजाई ओढ़ के सोना चाहिए, तब मजा आएगा गर्मी के मौसम में. We should change these practices. And also, we build houses using glass in the front. You go to Gurgaon, all the high rises are made with glass fronts, which bring in all the heat, then increase the need for you to have ACs. It's a simple thing, using hollow bricks, insulating bricks, reflective paints on the walls. We can reduce our heating, cooling load inside our houses by 15% to 20%. It's not going to cost that much. Even if it costs that much, somebody who is buying a flat for 50 lakhs can afford to pay 55 lakhs. Doesn't make that much difference to his EMI to do that. That will reduce the cooling load. In Delhi last year, peak power consumption was 6,700 megawatts, out of which 50% went into air conditioning alone. So definitely there is enormous scope to reduce the amount of cooling load through a variety of means and regulations that should be done, which will address the heat island issue. Less energy will also mean less emissions. It will address the mitigation issue also, and it will impinge on SDGs by reducing inequality. If in Delhi, I am consuming so much energy that is being produced, some of that energy, if it could be spared and go to my poorer friends in the slum colonies in Delhi, कि कम से कम पंखा तो हो जाए उनके घर में, or rural areas where they'll be able to use more electricity if I can sacrifice. Just like we are telling our developed country friends, you reduce your power consumption so that poorer countries like India can increase theirs. The same applies inside India. Richer parts of our country in the urban areas should reduce their energy consumption so that our poorer friends in the rural and urban areas can increase theirs and we reach a minimum. So once again, an integrated approach to require less cooling and therefore reducing the load on that and therefore reducing the amount of power you generate is the way to go.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I think, Professor Gupta, there's a question addressed to you also in the chat box. Do you want that to be read to you or will you just go ahead?
I think Professor Gupta had to leave because he is at NIT campus and
Okay.
the director.
So
so
let Arjun take the final words, or you do that, Dr. Simi.
No issues. Dr. Arjun, would you like to come in?
Who, me?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean.
Sir, would you like to conclude, Tikender sir? Raghu sir, yes, please go ahead.
No. Let Professor Raghu conclude the final words, and then
No, I don't want to say anything. I just thought I'll just take up, since that question has been raised. Dr. Gupta talked about the climate change and the non-climatic actors. Frankly, today, I mean, honestly, if you ask me, there are very few non-climatic actors. All actors who are working in our society and the economy are in one way or the other influencing the climate. The only non-climatic actors I can think of are indigenous people and tribal people who don't own vehicles, who don't burn LPG in their house, don't use electricity in their house, don't have a scooter or tractor or anything. You can possibly classify them as non-climate actors. Otherwise, frankly speaking, I think every section of society is a stakeholder in this process and we should be all working together.
Final words, Arjun or Dr. Simi, anyone?
Final words, yours, sir. If you would want
to.
Well,
I think it's been a very fruitful discussion. Am I audible? Because I removed my microphone.
Yes.
Okay.
No, you're audible.
So I think it's been a very fruitful discussion, and I really thank Dr. Raghunandan for sparing his time, and also Professor Gupta. And we were able to catch Professor Gupta out. I mean, he's not in Delhi, but still, Professor Anil Gupta spared some time and made some valuable contribution. I think it's been a very interesting discussion, and especially for our participants who actually have been listening more about city planning, city development, under this series that we run, #LocalGovernance, and how all these are quite interrelated, and we can't just see them in silos. So, Dr. Raghunandan, let me just allow to make a remark. I mean, and though I'm not a Gandhian by philosophy, but there's a very interesting Gandhian proverb that I would like to share here, and which I would love. I mean, which I do follow in my life, and I think what you preach, you should practice. And so that may sound too little. I mean, not to belittle this proverb, but I think this is important for us. So I just give these examples. I mean, just imagine your prime minister, instead of that Macbeth, walking to the office, or taking a bicycle, or the Delhi chief minister using the bicycle. And I remember one of our former chief ministers, Mr. Dhumal, who was the chief minister of Himachal Pradesh. He had introduced the scheme that no vehicles on Monday. Okay, so you'll go to the office. The chief minister was walking to the office, the chief secretary, everyone. So I think that may sound too trivial, but I think that behavioral change must happen from the places where we govern. Else, I think, of course, and then we require the kind of interventions that we have spoken about. But I think that is also important. So preach and practice must go hand in hand. And thank you so much, Dr. Raghu. And like you rightly said, I mean, the air condition example is really interesting. And it's apparently true. Not even 1918 degrees. But I mean, in offices you'll find the temperature of the air condition not more than 18 degrees. I mean, this is not a sustainable way. we have to find better solutions and a better sustainable way ahead for better livelihoods and for a better secure future, because it's an existential crisis. We are already feeling. Thank you so much, Dr. Raghu. Thank you, Dr. Gupta. Thank you, Dr. Simi, for being the.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody, and good night.
Thank you. I'll just conclude with the formal vote of thanks.
Yeah, please do that.
Very quickly. Thank you so much on behalf of the IMPRI Center for Habitat, Urban and Regional Studies. I would like to take this opportunity to thank our wonderful panelists who really provided intellectual insights according to their experience and their expertise on the implications of the sixth IPCC sixth assessment report, implications for urbanization. It has truly been very, very enriching. And I would like to thank Dr. D. Raghunandan and Professor Anil Gupta for sparing their valuable time and sharing with us your insights. Our moderator for the session and also of the series, #Local Governance, Tikender sir, thank you so much. We are so grateful that you took this initiative in having this very important discussion. I think discussions like this on this report should continue, and thank you so much. And I would also like to thank all our attendees here on Zoom and also on Facebook Live, and also to those who will be watching us later on YouTube and listening to the program on our different podcast platforms. Thank you so much, and I wish you all a very, very good night, and please stay safe. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Good
Thank
night.
you.
Good night.
Good night.
Bye.
Good night.